Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I will be talking about an alleged thriller from 1963, Escape from Hell Island. And our main character is one Captain James, an American charter boat captain who reluctantly agrees to a side job helping refugees flee Cuba. To pretty much no one's surprise, the job goes awry, leading to James's craft being attacked by a Cuban patrol boat. Of course, one real American with a Tommy gun is more than enough to deal with an entire army of communists. Or so this movie would have you believe, anyway. James's passengers do not escape unscathed, however. At least one of them has been killed in the crossfire, bringing the captain into conflict with the US authorities, who rescind his charter boat license. More important to the narrative, however, is the fact that one of the surviving refugees is a beautiful woman, played by an actress who sounds like the closest she's ever been to Cuba is filming this movie. The captain's interest in this attractive stranger earns the ire of her husband, but James does not seem too perturbed about that. Indeed, when he meets the woman again in a Key West bar, he happily dances with her. The woman shares her fears about her husband's violent nature, but James waves them away, opining that a barking dog never bites. Now, pretty sure that's not actually accurate, zoologically speaking. It's certainly inaccurate when it comes to the vengeful husband in the movie, who launches a plot to kill this arrogant American Lothario. Will Captain James survive the angry husband's vengeance? And more to the point, will you care? Escape from Hell Island is a low-budget black and white film with a cast of second-string actors headed by Mark Stevens, who had briefly enjoyed mainstream success in the late 40s, but who by around this era was doing acting work on the side while earning his main income from property management. The Hell Island of the film's title is, of course, Cuba itself, a slur on that island nation, which presumably meant Fidel Castro was not much a fan of this movie. I am also not much of a fan of it because it is boring, which in my opinion is pretty much the single biggest fault a film can have. Bad acting, nonsensical plots, dodgy dialogue, they're all flaws, of course, but they don't necessarily spoil the whole film experience. Being boring pretty much is the whole movie experience, and it's a bad one. So, let's dig into some of the ways that this film misfires. And the first problem is the protagonist. This isn't the fault of Mark Stevens, whose performance is adequate if unexceptional. It's the fault of the writing. I think the script is going for some of that cool Hemingway-esque world weariness, on which more later, but it flies wide of the mark and instead hits bitter, self-centered jerk. Captain James isn't a wounded hero who conceals his noble impulses under a veneer of amoral cynicism. He is an amoral cynic. He exhibits no care for anyone other than himself and his potential love interest, and the impulses in the latter case are clearly sexual and selfish, not noble. The film gives us no reason to care about Captain James and his fate, other than that he's the main character of the film. Even when he does things that are potentially positive, such as helping people flee a country they don't want to remain in, or helping a woman leave a partner who is probably abusive, his motives for doing so are negative, selfish ones, money in the former case and lust in the latter. The film has gone for the seemingly cold-hearted rogue with a secret soft spot archetype, but forgotten to actually include a soft spot. He's just a cold-hearted rogue. Now, if that were done intentionally, it might still be possible to make an interesting, if probably unpleasant film, but I don't believe it was intentional. I just think it was bad writing. An even bigger problem, however, is that almost nothing actually happens. The opening 45 minutes of this film are occupied with the escape from Cuba, a sequence which should, of course, capture the sentiments of the image on your screen. Fleeing from terror, fighting for survival, a dangerous mission against impossible odds. Sounds exciting. Alas, it's nothing like what actually happens. Instead, there's a lot of complaining from Captain James about his needing to do this job, and a lot of complaining from his passengers about being uncomfortable and unhappy, and then finally a singularly unexciting and unconvincing action scene when the Cuban patrol boat arrives. Someone needs to explain to these filmmakers that impossible odds is nothing like super easy, barely an inconvenience, and James's defeat of the Cuban Navy is definitely a case from column B. Worse is still to come, however. Remember how our captain's pursuit of a married woman has angered the lady's husband? Well, that ne'er-do-well finally unleashes his dastardly plan with about 20 minutes of the movie still to run. And his plan is to push James off his boat and into the ocean and then refuse to let him come back on board. Not sail off with the boat, or shoot him or stab him. Just kind of hang around and stop James from clambering back on the vessel until, I guess, until either James is too tired to swim anymore or a shark happens by and decides to eat him. This latter outcome is one the film desperately tries to sell as a possibility by including obvious stock footage of sharks. The effort is not a success, both because the editing is so poor that the sharks are obviously nowhere near the actors, and because the husband does nothing to attract the sharks. He could at least have thrown some chum in the water or something to make it appear like he was actually trying to bring them closer. Instead, we literally get 15 minutes of Captain James swimming in slow circles around the boat, waiting for the husband to get as bored as we are, and give him a chance to get back on board. It is terrible stuff. One of the most boring passages of film I have had the misfortune to sit through. The worst thing of all about the film, though, is that it so obviously takes much of its narrative inspiration from Ernest Hemingway's To Have and Have Not, and then throws out anything remotely interesting about that book. Presumably the changes were made so it could be claimed to be an original story, but they're all singularly ill-judged changes that make the narrative worse. Instead of an ordinary man who is driven by poverty and desperation, and the callous actions of those more fortunate than him, to immoral and illegal acts and the exploitation of those even more desperate than he is, we get a smug paean to a self-satisfied, self-centered jerk who experiences almost no real hardship. The film does make occasional efforts to give Captain James a fig leaf of adversity. Oh no, his boating license has been revoked, but these alleged difficulties have no actual narrative impact. James is getting along just fine as far as we can see. The only escape here is the freedom of the closing credits. Stay well away. Next time, Beware the Full Moon. I take a look at a trio of werewolf-themed films from the 60s and 70s. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've seen today's movie, well, you have my sympathy. And let me know what you thought of it.